I'm running a little bit late today, so I guess we better get started. Apologies for the late start time. You're more than welcome to put that in my evaluations. Just saying Dr. Barnes started late on one class period, and I was not having it. Before we get started, just as a quick reminder, we are in week 11. At the end of week 13, that is when your project submissions are due, your research project submissions. Please make sure you review the instructions on those. My goal was to make this more about the analysis than the write-up on this. There is a brief write-up required, but it's very brief. I think I said 1 to 2 pages, something along those lines. I'm more interested in the evidence. I also believe I told you that I do not want the data sets themselves, but I want the results of the analysis. So please make sure that you follow those requirements. It will be an interesting experience to try to evaluate 25 different projects as it is. So I try to limit it to the amount of information that I'm trying to sort through. If you have questions about that, if you have questions about what I'm looking for, feel free to reach out to me. I've already talked to several people, and I'm very interested to see what the results are. Some of these projects seem really, really interesting. I should say all the projects for the most part seem very interesting, but there are a few that kind of touch home from a research perspective for me. Today, we're in week 11, and this week starts kind of what I consider to be the emerging technology sections of this course. So we're going to talk about a few different concepts with respect to emerging technologies. Today, we're talking about cloud computing. Next week, we're going to be talking about cryptocurrencies. Specifically, we're also going to talk a little bit about crypto assets in general, blockchain concepts. We're going to talk about cryptography philosophy. Some very, very high level detail, because getting into the weeds on that can get very, very challenging. But it's probably, I'm expecting it's more than most people in the class will know. It's definitely more than I knew before I did the research. But there's a lot to absorb there. And then last 2 weeks, weeks 13 and 14 of our concept activities, we're going to be talking about AI. We're going to talk about AI specifically with respect to how we can use it moving forward and what some of the tools are. And then we're also going to talk about ESG with respect to AI moving forward. So should be interesting. These are things that are not traditional accounting topics, and I think that the accounting focus is a little bit challenging, but this one was a little bit more direct, given that this was something that occurred very, very recently with the Committee on Sponsoring Organizations and their disclosures with respect to cloud computing. I will encourage you, as we're going through this, either take diligent notes or bookmark this particular lecture if you're planning on taking ISC, because some of the things we're going to be talking about will be directly relevant to some of the sections on the ISC. The first section actually has a big several, I'll say there are modules. I think modules is the correct term within Becker that actually relates to cloud computing and deployment and models. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover it here, as it's not one of those things that you've probably covered to, at least not to a detailed level in many of your other classes. Now, if you have, great, you'll be ahead of the game, but this is something that I was not terribly familiar with when I started developing this activity a few weeks back. So I think this would be a good discussion to have. All right, so to start, just as a little bit of background on what this is going into, I was just caught off guard when I was doing preparation. Over the summer, I was preparing for this class, and part of my preparation was actually looking through the ISC section of the CPA exam, which is a new experience for me, because this is a brand new section. I was familiar with all the other sections to varying degrees, but this one is kind of a new introduction. And I will say that this course lines fairly closely to some of the content that is in ISC. I'm always going to throw the caveat out there. If you're planning on sitting for the CPA exam, which I encourage you to do so, do not just try to sit cold for the CPA exam. Don't just say, well, I sat through Dr. Barnes's advanced AIS class. I am ready for everything, okay? I appreciate the vote of confidence, but don't do that, all right? That's just a bad idea. That being said, I do think that there's some interesting alignment there. And one of the things they talked about is they talked about how the COSO ERM framework had been recently adapted to address cloud computing. And so I provided a sign on that and talked about guidance of applications of ERM to cloud computing. And we didn't really discuss this, at least I don't think we discussed this in there, but why is this so important? And the idea being is that ERM, Enterprise Resource Management, has a lot to do with the systems that organizations have in place and how their business and accounting protocols interact. If we've got a lot of organizations now that are utilizing cloud deployment models, then they're part of their enterprise resource system, their information system as a whole is going to be on the cloud. And that creates a whole new series of concerns that we didn't have, 20 years ago. I say 10 years ago. Clouds have been around for at least that long. I know they have because I've been using Dropbox for at least that time. But 20 years ago, before clouds became fairly commonplace to use, this was not something that we had to deal with. And it's also important to note that what we think of as cloud deployment is not necessarily correct. I know a lot of people probably use Dropbox and Google and Microsoft OneDrive and think, all right, it's just storage. And I was guilty of that too. I was guilty of that philosophy, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about something that's a lot more robust and is going to become a lot more profound over time. So I think it's worthwhile to have this discussion. So let's go ahead and start out with the individual questions, and I'm going to do my best to try to manage all the information streams that I've got associated with this. So first resource, I had you all look at this website. It's called Geeks for Geeks. And Geeks for Geeks website, I've used it in a couple of different classes, and it's got some really good information. That being said, the pop-ups are a killer. Okay, I would love it if that we could just find some resources where the pop-ups just didn't continuously go. That's the problem with using free resources, is that they have to subsidize it somehow. So the pop-ups were really bad in this instance. So I made a PDF of the file. And I asked some questions about this. What is a cloud deployment model? So Lotus, what did your group identify as far as what is a cloud deployment model?
We said a cloud deployment model is a virtual computing environment with architecture that varies depending on the amount of data you want to store and must access the.
Yeah, and that's word for word what I had. That's from the article itself, which I think is a very robust definition. And so virtual computing environment with a deployment architecture that varies depending on the amount of data you want to store and who has access to the infrastructure. Now, we're going to revisit that because this is going to be relevant to how we actually think about the not just the deployment models themselves or the deployment models, but also the models of cloud computing as we get further on down into it. So there are 5 types of cloud deployment models, and I don't like the terminology here because I wanted to separate these from models of cloud computing, which that sounds like they should be the same thing. But a cloud deployment model would be, okay, for what audience is this going to be deployed for? Whereas a model of cloud computing is what type of resources are provided in this particular system. So let's go ahead and deal with the first. And we had the various types of cloud deployment models. You should have identified 5, I believe. Dylan, what did your group identify?
We said the different ones were public, private, hybrid, community, and multi-cloud.
Yes. And public, private, hybrid, community, and multi-cloud, which those terminology tend to get bandied about quite a bit in the IT community. These are actually nearly identical to the blockchain deployment models. I don't think there's a multi-blockchain deployment model, but other than that, those are very similar to what we talk about when we talk about the blockchain deployment models. I only know that because I've been discussing blockchain in my AIS class this week. So that's what came up. So we're going to revisit that because these have to do with the level of resources and what is accessible to the systems, or sorry, not level of resources, the level of access to the systems. And then the level of resource will be defined by our next discussion, which is going to be the common models of cloud computing. Now, you may have heard of these before. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually talk about each of the definitions, and then I want to actually offer some additional insight because I think that this will be not only relevant for answering some of the future questions, but also relevant for understanding the difference between these. So I'm going to do these one at a time. So 3 types of common models of cloud computing. What are they? And provide a brief definition of each. All right. So Leah, can you give me one of these? One of the models and definition.
IaaS that helps in delivering computer infrastructure on an extra.
Yes, IaaS, infrastructure as a service. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to where this is actually discussed in the area, the Geeks for Geeks article. So infrastructure for supporting operations, servicing to network equipment, devices, database, and web servers. Now, I want to expand upon this definition because I do think that this is important to characterize, because otherwise you just read these definitions and it's really hard to differentiate what's the difference between these models of cloud computing. So the way that Becker actually defines information or infrastructure as a service that offers essential computing, storage, and networking resources on demand on a pay-as-you-go basis. This is the interesting caveats that they throw in here, and this is going to be differentiated to the different types of models as we talk about them shortly. Under IaaS, most applications are managed by the organization, or that means the company that's receiving the services. So under infrastructure as a service, the applications are going to be managed by the organization. Storage, processing, and some security is managed by the cloud service provider. So when we think about IaaS, they're providing the infrastructure, but most of the operations that take place under this infrastructure are going to be under the auspices of the organization that's receiving the service. So I'm going to use a company as an example because that's the easy way to think about it. So let's use my old handy go-to Walmart. Okay, Walmart's a very recognizable organization. If they were receiving infrastructure as a service cloud model, then they would be responsible for managing most of the applications on that infrastructure. What would be in the hands of the cloud service provider would be storage, processing, and some security, though not all of the security. So very basically, most of it is in the hands of the organization that requests the cloud model. Okay, not in the cloud service provider hands, but the organization's hands. All right, let's go to the next one. What is the second one of these? Jason, I think you were the next one up on the list.
Platform as a service.
Okay.
AAS, and help develop build application and service over the internet by providing them platform.
Good. So helps developers build application services on the internet by providing them with a platform. Okay, so not providing the infrastructure, but providing the platform instead. Okay, platform and service, good definition. All right. So a little bit more clarification on this particular point. Again, I'm going to go into what Becker talks about here because I think this is an interesting differentiation point. So Becker says that platform as service is a complete development and deployment environment in the cloud with resources to help you deliver everything from simple cloud-based applications to sophisticated cloud-based enterprise applications. Now, again, here's the important distinction that I wanted to make because this is going to be important for us for analysis a little bit later. Proprietary applications are managed by the organization. So what do I mean by proprietary? What does that term mean?
Something the organization itself has built. They know how the code works. They don't freely distribute the code to other. Exactly,
yes. So an application that was developed and built by the organization itself. It's not something that any other organization has access to. So proprietary application is going to be managed by the organization. Everything else is managed by the cloud service provider. So assuming that you've got a lot of proprietary applications on a platform as a service cloud, then the organization will manage all of those. But basically everything else is going to be managed by the cloud service provider. So a bit of a differentiation there. We talked about under infrastructure as service, most of it is managed by the organization. Under platform as service, it's only going to be proprietary applications, only the applications that the organization itself has developed for internal use. All right, then we've got our final one. So what is our final one, Nadi?
So the software as a service is delivering services and applications over the internet.
Okay, yeah, so delivering services and applications over the internet, okay. Generally called web-based software or hosted software. And just as good for context with this particular cloud deployment model, would you say that this is the most frequently used or least frequently used out of the three? I'm not asking specifically Dottie, although Dottie's free to answer if anybody wants to know. Anybody know? So around 60% of companies use software as a service in their cloud. It is by far the most frequently used. Okay, so the majority of use, and we can see that here. The majority of the cloud use that we have here at Truman State is software as a service. All right, and we can kind of see that through the Google Drive use, through OneDrive use. A lot of the services that we receive are not proprietary applications, but applications that were developed by that particular party. Outlook, Excel, Microsoft Word, all the Microsoft applications and the Google applications that we have access to. We very rarely use internal applications. Not a lot of were developed here in-house at Truman State. I don't want to say none, but to my knowledge, there aren't any. All right. Again, Becker says that this allows users to connect to use cloud-based applications over the internet. So email, calendar, and office tools, things along those lines. Everything except for application usage is managed by the cloud service provider. So every single item is going to be managed by the cloud service provider. The only thing that's not managed by the cloud service provider is the individual application usage. So if we use Truman State as our example in this particular one, the only thing that our organization manages is what the usage of these applications are. And so you can probably see that. We have to have specific sign-ins. We've got a specific security protocol, who has access to certain programs, what programs are delivered, and that is what's managed by Truman State. But the actual programs themselves, the actual security, the deployment, that is going to be managed by the cloud service provider, whether that be Microsoft or Google or whatever other system we might have in place. So important differentiation there. It's important to set that. And again, easy way to think about those is that they're very hard to say. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. We've got IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Okay, and I guess for giggles, they decide to for each of these, they decide to actually capitalize the first and last letters. And I don't know, I'd be a little bit more comfortable if there was not that variety there, but at least it's memorable. So, all right, so moving on. Let's talk about what was going on in the second resource. So what are the 5 components of the COSA Enterprise Resource Management Framework? So real quick to talk about this is something that is very recent. This is actually a pretty profound change. The COSA Enterprise Risk Management Framework used to be just the COSO framework with some additional steps in there. And some of you may actually remember that because we talked about that very briefly in AIS when you had me. We talked about how the Enterprise Resource Management Framework changed. This was a very recent change. It occurred, I think, last year, maybe slightly before that. But the ER framework actually updated to be more similar in the COSO framework. So what are the 5 components of the Enterprise Risk Management Framework? Oh, keep shutting down. Jordan, what did your group say on this one?
Governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, performance, review and revision, and information, communication, and reporting.
Okay, so just widely speaking, are these similar? Is this similar to our internal control integrated framework? Yeah, it just seems like everything's there. It's like how everything tastes like chicken. Everything seems like the control framework. That's how I'm going to compare everything to. No, legitimately speaking, this is very similar to internal control integrated framework. And it makes sense that it is because it's a COSO item. It's a COSO deployment model. So what is the difference? That was kind of the question. How is it different? Well, when we talk about the ERM framework, it is definitely broader in perspective. And that makes sense because enterprise resource management is going to be about organizational value and about all the things that organization does. We talk about the internal control integrated framework, that is going to be focused specifically on risk. It's going to be focused specifically on controls of the organization. So the ERM framework, while it is very similar in perspective as to the COSO internal control integrated framework, the scope is much wider. Okay, it's also intended for long-term planning and objectives. Where we think about the COSO internal control integrated framework, it tends to be very short-term in nature. It tends to be very short-term in perspective. So something to consider with that. We'll come back to that. But what I want to do now is I want to go back to the cloud deployment models, and I want to provide a brief definition for each of the deployment models. And I'm not going to specifically call on anybody to do this because I think that they actually do a fairly good job of this in the in this. Not to say that you didn't do a good job, but there's actually a document. Hold on, where does it say? First resource PDF. Pages 2 through 7. Yeah. I want to say I thought they had a table, but I was wrong. I was looking at page numbers. Okay. So just a brief summary. I guess I will call on people because yeah, I was unprepared otherwise. So Brock said I was going to call on you, and I'm going to call on you. Okay. So let's start out with public cloud. What's the definition of public cloud?
In this model, the cloud provider owns and manages the infrastructure, which is made available to the general public. It's a shared environment where resources can be accessed by multiple users, typically over the internet.
Okay, so pretty broad scope about who owns it, and the cloud provider owns the resources, but provided over the internet to general people and major industry groups. I think we can kind of think about Dropbox and Google Drive as they originally were started. Those are going to be considered public cloud. It's not necessarily the same as the public cloud, or not the cloud that we have for Google Drive here, because that is a proprietary cloud for Truman State. But you can still access Google Drive through other resources. If you wanted to access it, if you got signed up for a Google account, like a Gmail account, you could access Google Drive through that way. So that would be an example of a public cloud. All right, let's move down. So what is a private cloud? And we're going to go all the way back up to Lotus. What'd your group say?
Private cloud is accessible to only people who have the grant access and it has individual hardware per cloud or service provider.
And I thought it was interesting to say, they said in the definition, it's exact opposite of the public cloud deployment model. When you read through the definition, does it sound like this is the exact opposite? It doesn't seem like exact opposite. It seems like the access is the exact opposite. It's only to accessible people who've been provided permission, but the actual services it provides don't seem all that different. Private cloud, as far as the scope and as far as its usage, it seems very similar to a public cloud. The only big difference is that it's more of a permission process as opposed to a permissionless process. But the intention was good in that definition. All right. Moving on to hybrid cloud. Okay, now hybrid cloud is a little bit harder to identify. So Dylan, what's your group say on this?
We just said combines public and private clouds, allowing data and applications to be shared between them.
Okay, did you put best of both worlds in your definition?
We do not know.
Okay, all right. So you don't believe it's the best of both worlds?
Very well could be, but
It could be.
not what came to our mind.
Okay, so when you think about the term best of both worlds, you're not thinking cloud deployment models.
I'm thinking Hannah Montana.
Hannah Montana. Okay, all right. Sadly, I get that joke. All right. Yeah. So what happens when you've got young nieces? All right. So hybrid solution. Basically, we're taking advantage of public cloud's cost savings, but actually that permissions that are inherent in a private cloud system. So hybrid is going to be definitely one of those ones that if you need to have a secured system but you are worried about the cost associated with that, it's going to be something that's going to be appealing to you. I would argue that the Truman State system, I kind of classified it as a private system, but it probably reaches more of a hybrid system than a public system or a private system, simply because even when we're not on the Truman State servers, we can still access those drives. I've actually got a link to my Google Drive folder for Truman State at home on my computer, which makes it easy when I have to work on the weekends. Okay. So yeah, thanks Truman State for that. I appreciate that I get to work on the weekends easily. Yeah. Thanks guys. Yeah, you're great. All right. So moving on, we got two more models. All right. What is the next one? Leah.
The community model, it offers cloud services for a group of people or an organization is typically managed by a third party, making it more cost effective.
Yeah, good. So managed by a third party, but it's going to be something that's allowed amongst multiple organizations. Oftentimes when we talk about this model, this is going to be a cloud deployment model where all of these organizations interact with one another. This would be something where we see an organization's got a series of businesses and they have vendors or customers that want to have access to the systems. This would actually be an example of community cloud model. So that would be something that we consider to be considered to be accessible. It does make it effective because we want to make sure that organizations that are doing business with the primary organization have access to the system. Usually the primary organization will be managing that cloud, which as Leah pointed out, does make it more cost effective than having an external provider use it. And then we have talked about the multi-cloud model. Okay, so multi-cloud model. So what is that, Jason?
Multi-cloud provides scalability and by using multiple providers, but sometimes maybe more costly, and you need to invest more time to manage it.
Mm-hmm. So a multi-cloud model is basically going to say that all the needs that are necessitated by the organization's operations cannot be met by a single cloud provider. So we might have to have multiple cloud providers. This might be important if we're talking about cloud systems or cloud service providers that offer unique services that are not available through other systems. This is something that I think that you could probably make an argument for Truman State is they're under a multi-cloud system. We have access to both Google Drive and OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive. That I think is more incidental than anything. I don't think it's because they've identified that there's a big gap between those two service providers. From what I understand, this is talking to IT. IT has said that we're moving away from Google systems, which makes me sad, by the way, because I post everything to YouTube. So not having that outlet to post to, I'm not sure what I will do in that. Not having access to Google will not be a major loss because most of the services that are provided through Google can actually be accessed through a OneDrive model as well through Microsoft. That being said, there's definitely going to be more specific scenarios where specific services, specific infrastructure or platforms are going to be necessitated by use of a cloud service provider that are not accessible through other cloud services. So if you've got a general cloud service provider and then a very specific systems that you need access to, you might have a multi-cloud. All right. So the next question that I had you guys approach. So I wanted you to look at the cloud deployment models, and there was a table that we're going to look at, and I want you to actually characterize the factors that are in these models. So let's just go ahead and take a quick look at this table. It's on page 8 in the. Let's see. So what we have factors is like initial setup, scalability and flexibility, cost comparison, reliability, data security, and data privacy. Now, all of these are fairly intuitive with respect to how they operate. The ones that I want to kind of focus in on are ones that are relevant to this course. Scalability and flexibility. Obviously, that's going to be a very important one when we talk about scalability and flexibility. That needs to be able to operate in different organizations. More broad systems are going to definitely require higher scalability and flexibility. But the good news is that for the most part, most of these are fairly high in scalability and flexibility. The one that's not is going to be a community cloud. And that says it's got a fixed scalability and flexibility. Why do you suppose that's the case? My speculation on this one, and again, most of this is speculation, by the way, so don't take anything I say as gospel. But my speculation on this is that when you talk about a cloud that's going to integrate multiple organizations, that if you have too much variability in the cloud system itself, that's going to create problems for the system. So there needs to be a very, very specific structure that's developed for a group of organizations that will be working together. And so more flexibility is generally going to be problematic because that means that there's going to be more concerns in other areas such as security and cost. All right. As far as security and privacy goes, these are fairly straightforward. Security and privacy obviously are going to be very high on the more complex models, but that also usually gets traded off with respect to cost. Okay. So the public cloud is the most cost effective, but it's also going to be the least secure. So that's something that we've already talked about pretty heavily, that more security is generally going to be a higher cost, and we have to actually make the determination at what point is the cost exceeding the benefit that's provided. But you'll notice in here that we did not have a multi-cloud model. And I think for part of the reason that makes sense, because a multi-cloud model is not well defined. It's not well defined as to what components this would include. But just for fun, I wanted to go ahead and try to see what we figure each of these would be set up, or what the factors would be in a multi-cloud model. Now I'm going to call on one group and I'm going to say there's no right answer for this one. If you've got different answers, that's fine. And I'm not going to identify specifically. I just want to compare to see what you guys came up with to what I came up with. All right. So where are we at? Dottie, you're the one who gets the joy of actually talking about this. So if I were to go through the factors of this in a multi-cloud model, what does your group identify initial setup as?
So we said medium complexity.
Okay.
Somewhere.
Okay. Okay. I would agree with that. Okay. What about scalability and flexibility?
High.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably true too, because that's the whole point of having a system like that. What about the cost?
It's between a public and a private cloud.
Okay. All right. I said it would be costly just simply because if we're a multi-cloud model that you'd have multiple systems. But again, if it depends on the scenario. If you're talking about multiple public clouds, then it would probably not be. It'd probably still be cost effective. But reliability, security, and privacy. Well, what did you come up with on those?
Said high reliability but low security and privacy.
Okay. All right. And integrating multiple systems can certainly be problematic. Okay. Again, this is highly contingent on the systems that are being integrated together. Because I didn't specify under a multi-cloud model, are you integrating just two public clouds? Are you integrating a public cloud and a private cloud? Are we integrating a hybrid cloud with a community cloud? A lot of that would be contingent on what it is that we're integrating, which is why I don't think they put this table in there, because basically every single answer would be our favorite answer in accounting, which is what? It depends. Yes. Yeah. What did you learn in advanced AIS? It depends. It's like, what does it depend on? No, that's what I learned. It depends. All right. Question number 6. Consider the models of cloud computing that we identified in question 2. Which cloud deployment models would be most appropriate for each of the models of cloud computing? And identify a type of business that would be likely to use each of these type of model of cloud computing. This was not really a fair question given what I gave you for the initial assignment, but hopefully this provides a little bit more insight after I talked about what the general intention was for IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So let's go ahead and revisit those and talk a little bit about those. So I want to start out with infrastructure as a service. So Jordan, for infrastructure as a service, what did your group identify the most likely types of cloud deployment models?
We said like community or private.
Okay. Yeah, I said private, hybrid, and multi, but I think that community, there's an argument for that one as well. Basically, you can make an argument for anything other than a public model, be the case. What type of organizations would you say that would use a IaaS?
We said like General Mills just because it's a large corporation.
Good. Okay, so that's exactly what I was aiming for. Less specifically, but and that's still in the same vein. We're talking about large organizations with enough resources to manage that proprietary IT systems. Because remember, infrastructure as a service, most everything is going to be managed by the organization itself, not by the cloud service provider. So if you're taking on that task, then you need to have enough resources to be able to manage that. So we're talking about a large organization. All right. Let's contrast that to platform as a service. Brock, which cloud deployment models did your group identify for this one?
We said public, private, or hybrid.
Very good. Okay, I think I said community too, but I agree with that sentiment. Okay, I said all but multi. What size organization or what type of organization do you think would be using platform as a service?
Probably large, bigger ones, or I could see startup companies doing, so they can build.
Yeah, you basically found the average of where I was going because I my answer, and again, keep in mind that my answer is not gospel. We are on just speculation here, so you feel free to disagree with me. And if you have any vehement disagreement, feel free to raise your hand and shout. Okay, all right. But again, the idea being is that we're probably talking about large organizations. I say medium organizations. So I'm not talking about the largest organization that have infinite resources, but medium-sized organizations, probably not market leaders, with some IT system resource management available. Okay, so Truman State would not fall in this line. We would probably not be able to effectively use platform as a service. We're not developing proprietary tools, but a lot of other organizations that are trying to develop their own applications for administration and services, they would want to utilize this. So a larger organization, but not as large as the ones that use IaaS. And then we have software as a service. And Lois, we're back to you again.
We said it would be a public effort, and we said it would probably be best for small business.
Yes, okay. The public would be the most common. I think we can make the argument for private and hybrid as well. That's probably what we would see for Truman State is that they're not necessarily on a public cloud, but it's public-ish. I made the distinction about that earlier. But definitely small organizations that have little existing IT infrastructure. So the only management that actually goes into it is the actual management of the application usage as we specified. Okay, final question for today. Referring to the third resource, in your opinion, why is specific guidance necessary with respect to ERM for cloud computing? So I alluded to this at the beginning of the lecture, but I want to revisit this, okay? So Dylan, what did your group say with respect to this first question?
We said because like the changing environment of cloud computing, it had to be a little more like not necessarily broad, but apply more toward like cloud computing than just overall controls. Right.
So keep in mind the enterprise resource management framework, and I'm just going to go back to that real quick. The enterprise resource management has to do with basically the overall objectives of the organization and how those objectives are accomplished. And so when we talk about the enterprise resource management, it's just a broad framework for accomplishing the organization's objectives. Now, in the past, if we'd use this, and again, keep in mind this is a fairly new framework. So when I say in the past, I'm talking about hyperbolically. I'm not saying that we would use this specific framework in the past because it didn't exist in the past. But if we think about how we would employ this in the past, one of the big concerns would be is how an organization manages its own resources, simply because they did not have external resources. This is a new concern now with cloud computing, is the fact that they actually have access to resources that are not their own. And the management of those resources is going to be challenging with respect to what the way things used to be. So This is something that's not very common or not so very knowledgeable. If you think about what it is that you do on a daily basis, the management of your own resources, you probably don't think a lot about, okay, what about those things I had stored in the cloud? What do I need to do with those? You assume that those are going to take care of themselves. And one of the problems is that if we don't have a secure infrastructure, if we don't have management of those resources, if we don't have an understanding of the way those resources should be managed, then they can be mismanaged very easily. So having this discussion is really important to understand that this is another aspect of the organization's information system. This is another aspect of their enterprise resource management system. And basically, we've got to be able to understand how it fits into the whole and what our objectives are in each of these areas. And I tend to focus on security because, you know, I'm an accountant, I'm also an auditor, but all of these objectives are relevant. How do the resources in the cloud, how do these affect to governance and culture? Okay, how do these affect to strategy and objective setting? How do they affect performance? How do they affect review and revision? How do they affect information communication reporting? All of these are important questions to ask, and all these are questions that we did not have to necessarily answer in previous iterations. All right, so which components of the ERM framework are likely the most relevant to cloud computing? So again, another subjective question. Seems like I'm asking a lot of those today. It's like I don't necessarily know all the answers, but that's okay. Okay, it's still important to explore because that actually improves our critical thinking ability. So let's go ahead and talk to Leah about this one. So Leah, you've got the kind of the foundational question of the 5 enterprise resource management components. What do you think are the most important, or what does your group say are the most important with respect to cloud computing?
You kind of made it just sound like it was all of them, but the most we went with strategy and objective setting, and then performance, because you have to determine what cloud deployment and cloud computing models you want to use, and obviously you need to make sure that they're being utilized and running well.
Yeah. And I think that I can make an argument for all of them, but I do think that there are definitely going to be those that are more priority than others. I would definitely agree with strategy and objective setting and performance. But I think I also identified information and communication and reporting simply because the conveyance of detail across the system is going to be affected by how fully integrated the cloud system is in the organization. If we're talking about something like a software as a service model, then that's going to be a major component. If we're talking about something that's infrastructure as a service, it's going to be a minor component. Again, it goes back to the old adage that we say, what is the most important term that an accountant can use, especially in this course? That's it depends. And a lot of this will be dependent on what the organizational infrastructure looks like. All right, and with that, we are done for today. We have another quiz on Friday, and we're going to start Alteryx number 3 on Friday. Alteryx number 2 is due at the beginning of class. Please make sure you complete that. I'll see you all then.